We all do.
Good afternoon. In compliance with Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, I call to order a regular voting meeting of the Public Facility Corporation Board of the Directors of the Austin ISD School District, the Austin Independent School District for Monday, March 25th, 2025 at 4:07 p.m. This meeting is being broadcast on cable channel 22 through Spectrum, Astound Broadband, and on channel 99 through AT&T Uverse. Closed captioning in English is available on those platforms for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Welcome and thank you for joining us. First up is 1.2, approval of the agenda. We will move to the approval of the agenda. Secretary Boswell, do you have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Having a motion by Director Boswell and a second by Director Gonzalez to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. The motion passes unanimously with a vote of 3 in favor by all those, in favor by all those on the dais. All right. On the consent, we will now move to the action item on today's agenda. Secretary Boswell, do you have a motion to approve agenda item 2.1?
Yes, I move to approve item 2.1, February 24th, 2025, Public Facility Corporation voting meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Directors, are there any questions or comments? Okay. Having a motion by Secretary Boswell and a second by Director Gonzalez to approve item 2.1, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the workshop to present the legislative update and governance of PFC. I'd like to welcome up Jeremy Striffler, Director of Real Estate and Asset Management, and Summer Greathouse, PFC Legal, to take us through the update.
Well, good afternoon. So as part of this workshop, we have some just informational stuff up front with a legislative update to let you know what's being, or at least what's some proposed bills around PFCs, public facility corporations. But then we're going to spend more of our time around governance and taking this as an opportunity to have a discussion around everything from board composition to board term, and talk through some cleanup, refinement that we have the opportunity to do here going forward in terms of both the certificate of formation and the bylaws to kind of put us onto track as to where this public facility corporation wants to go, and then make sure that we have time over the next so many months to put those all in motion in terms of any filings with the state and board action, the larger school board actions, all in advance of, the one definitive item that we have is towards the end of this calendar year is entering into a ground lease with the NRP group for the Coy site. What we want to do beyond the Coy site, at least we'll have kind of all the elements in place to allow ourselves to consider those opportunities, though we don't have any immediate action items beyond that. And so throughout, we really want to take the spirit of this being a workshop, a discussion. So please, throughout, we want questions and thoughts, et cetera, and not be thought of like this is a presentation. So I'm going to start just briefly, take a minute or two to talk through 3 bills that have been filed but have not been taken up yet. And Summer is going to we'll add some more context as needed, but 3 bills have been filed this legislative session as that relates to public facility corporations. So the first, HB 035321, there's 2 notable things. One is amends the code to no longer allow school districts to create public facility corporations. So what we do not know yet is the implication for existing. So not only ourselves, El Paso, Houston, even Pflugerville nearby, and others have formed public facility corporations. While many have not taken much action, there's a lot of existing school districts, school district public facility corporations, and so not clear if that means we are stopped, or do we get kind of, since we're already created, that we get to continue acting, but no new PFCs from school districts. The other is that it's really a kind of a sweeping reform that requires all projects to demonstrate that 60% of the tax exemption that the school district is providing to that developer as part of the transaction, that long-term ground lease, that it's returned in the form of reduced rents. And the challenge that could present is in the underwriting of the deals, right? At the end of the day, groups like NRP and others need to go get financing, and they have certain margins that they're trying to capture. And so concern would be ability to secure financing, and if not, then right, if you can't underwrite these projects, then that really would just slow down PFC projects completely, whether or not it's a school district, but also cities and counties across Texas that have formed PFCs.
And I'll just add to that, so that it also, from our reading of the bill, there's no grandfathering language, so this would apply to all deals. So this would apply to the Anita Coy deal, even if we had already approved it and it was already in process, even if it was already on the ground and occupied, we'd have to go back and what that 60% number, that your current, for Anita Coy, if you'll remember, we have 10% of the units at 60% AMI and 40% of the units at 80% AMI, and the remainder are market rate. So, and that's the statutory minimum, right? We talked about that a lot, about where we wanted to land there. 60% of the taxes, it looks different than that. It would require a different AMI mix with probably some additional affordability, which is what affects the underwriting, right? You're restricting the project's ability to get additional rents, which means that then the bank's underwriting, the equity underwriting is all false at that point. So it's really, there's a lot of, you guys are at the cusp of being active. I have a lot of clients who have already done a bunch of these deals, and they would have to go back and just totally probably scrap the deal, scrap the partnership, figure out something new going forward. It's a real mess.
So I guess I want to go back to the first bullet point.
Yeah.
Why? Why? Like, I'm sure the person that wrote this bill, or the group of people that signed on to this bill and said, hey, we don't think this is a good idea because we don't want affordable housing. We don't want people to have housing for their staff members and community.
I mean, I think the why is a good question that I cannot answer with certainty because I'm not in the room with these folks writing the bill. But my assumption is that, specifically with respect to school districts, they feel that school districts aren't in the business of housing. School districts are in the business of educating children. And so therefore you shouldn't be doing these other things, not thinking through, like what you were saying, staff, and the fact that school districts already have the ability to do teacherages. Like school districts have the ability to do a lot more than just educate children, because you're obviously dealing with, huge infrastructure of employees, facilities. And I think it's important to note PFCs are being used by school districts not just for housing, right? They're being used by school districts for other assets. So I think this bill overlooks that fact and probably was drafted with the advice of folks maybe who don't fully understand what school districts are doing with PFCs.
Okay.
And it would cut off a source of revenue for school districts if this goes away.
I wasn't going to go there, but yes. Thank you.
So the second bill, and HB 4306, the first is it just clarifies or adds language to the definition of a multifamily residential development to say that it's 4 or more dwelling units. Again, some speculation from us in our reading these bills and trying to say, well, what are they getting at? The way that the code is written around public facility corporations, it really speaks to apartment buildings. And this, I think, further makes that clear that this is not meant for, single family homes that are being marketed for rent. And so this kind of really eliminates that from being pursued. The second states that if a development is sponsored by a school district, either one of the two has to occur. Either at least 75% of the residential units are restricted to occupancy by households with at least one employee of the district, or the development is on a property that had been used for at least 10 years by the district as a school campus or for administrative functions. I could say, at least in terms of the second bullet point, confidently, like, we don't have any sites that we haven't used in more than 10 years, right? Even the COI is still being used. If we think about some other school properties that have been closed, even those are only within the last 4 or 5 years. So that really, this does not immediately impact us. It could down the road if we weren't taking action on property. The other, though, and in discussing this with Summers, that 75% requirement, while we wouldn't be beholden to that for like the COI, it's unclear as how does that track with fair housing laws, right? You are essentially discriminating someone based on their employer, which is very different than how we've structured the COI site, which is we're giving priority but not exclusivity. And the other, I think, challenge of, just in my opinion, is depending upon how large the project is, right, that to guarantee that you're going to have that many employees who want to be there, 75% will be employees, I think that could be very difficulty. And again, could be a way to thwart school districts from doing these projects, because that might be something that from the developers say, well, this is just not feasible, so. And then the last one, HB 4307, it's really more kind of in the weeds type of thing, but it, because it amends audit requirements. And then the other is, for all tax exemptions, we'd also have to submit an exemption application to the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs and the appraisal districts. So right now, the COI site, especially given the board composition, we're not beholden to get approvals from the city of Austin or Travis County, the other taxing entities here. This isn't clear in Summer, maybe clarify, it doesn't, not clear if it's explicit approval or just that you have to submit a form, but at least it adds a little more awareness. So there could be some benefit to that, right, in being good partners, good neighbors with the other taxing entities, but a little clarity is needed as to whether is it approval versus just, am I telling you or asking you, All of these bills, none have gone past being filed. They haven't been taken up yet. So we are tracking them, as time allows between now and the end of legislative session, either kind of indirect follow-up with you all, or if we have a meeting and presents the opportunity to kind of catch up where things are at, we'll certainly do that. But just wanted to put these on your radar, that these are at least been filed. And we know there's been so many bills being filed with the legislative session, but better to at least not be surprised.
And I think if we know, certainly if I know that they've been referred to committee for hearing or something, I'll be reaching out to make sure that, everyone's aware of that. And if we need to go testify and talk about why, what the changes are that would be needed in order to make the bills workable, I'm available to do that. I'm testifying tomorrow morning on a bill for housing finance corporations. So I will be tracking that actively and make sure that you guys are in the loop.
Thank you. And I wonder if there's a reason for us to look at adopting priorities, schedule a meeting where we could adopt priorities so that we can take an official position, if that would be valuable or not. Because this is not part of our larger district legislative priorities. We're a different entity, and I think that's a worthwhile question for council, probably.
Yeah, I think you'll see as we get into the next talk about governance documents, I think some of it will be on timing. I think absolutely makes sense if the board wanted to have legislative priorities, but in terms of taking formal action, we have to talk you through some timing issues where that might not have as much.
With the bylaws.
With the bylaws, and it might not have as much teeth. as you might like.
Might inform our bylaws then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
And do you have a sense about whether you expect these to move or not? Honestly, they've been read and referred to committee, which is pretty, standard. That doesn't mean they're going anywhere necessarily.
Yeah. I think that these bills will face some challenges in moving forward. But it's hard to predict. Things change on a day-by-day basis, as you know, it's in session. So if I had to put money on it right now, I would say these bills I think there's a lot of other priorities moving forward, and I think these bills are going to probably not. I think the other bills will be moving forward, but these will be not moving forward. But like I said, day by day. Yeah. And certainly you would not be the only ones that would want to have a voice at the table. There's going to be a lot of other folks wanting to comment on this, probably in the same direction that I would expect that you guys would go as well. So I think there'd be a lot of folks kind of saying like, these are all the issues we're seeing. And if you were to move forward with this, there would have to be a lot of amendments. And I think there's just a lot of chance that there's, points of order raised. There's just a lot of challenges that these would face.
Thank you.
great. So next, we want to talk about the governance documents. So there's two main documents, the certificate of formation and the bylaws. In retrospect, when we kind of move forward with all this, we were moving, quickly to make sure we had a tool in place to give confidence to the market, i.e. the development teams that were submitting bids on the COI site, to show like, look, we know this is a tool we have, and we want to make sure we could leverage it to kind of bring out the best result. And now with 2020 vision, and with the help of Summer, who we didn't have in place at the beginning, we have now kind of seen clearly that a little bit more time in the certificate of formation and the bylaws would have been helpful, but we do have, this is the opportunity now to adjust, revise, get it right. So that way going forward, we are kind of very clear as to what we're doing here. And so I want to acknowledge that these are imperfect in their current place, but like that's the purpose of today's conversation, is to fix it. And so we're going to start with the certificate of formation. I'll turn over Summer to kind of talk through some recommended changes, and of course, please ask questions as we're going through this, and then we'll then move on to the bylaws. But it's important to the bylaws inform the formation and vice versa. So they kind of speak to each other. And so what's really one thing that is missing right now is that they aren't talking in unison, and that is something we need to fix.
So that, just kind of building on that, a lot of the changes we'll talk about kind of are going to go hand in hand. So even though they're listed under certificate of formation or bylaws, there's probably going to be corresponding changes that we make in each. So if we change the number of directors or we change the composition of the board, that's going to come up in each of those two documents. So it's not just only reflected in the certificate of formation. There'll be changes that correspond that will happen in the bylaws as well. So, and again, please, like if there's something that I say that doesn't make sense or that you have questions about, just stop me, because this is totally meant to be a dialogue, and I'll probably actually have questions, for you guys to weigh in on or to think about as well. So one of the big changes that I think we need to talk about is, obviously we touched on this last time, your directors, the makeup of your board of directors. We obviously need to update the number in your certificate of formation and make sure that and your bylaws are harmonious. But I think we just need to talk about what the vision is for the composition of the board. I think last time we talked a little bit about, would we be interested in having non-elected officials, so non-trustee members on the board? And that is something that I think if there's a couple of...
So please, I think first guidance, if you want to jump right into that specific item, or because we have later in the deck.
I would like to add 2.
Oh, but that's saying, do you want to go into the conversation right now about the number of directors, or kind of talk high level first about?
Yeah, what do you think?
I wrote 3, 5, or 7, so.
There you go.
So why don't we
You said
go
2?
to it? So if you move in the handout that was provided, the section about discuss board composition, Summer has put together for us a kind of pro-con chart of the number of elected officials versus appointees. So maybe you just want to speak to it a little high level and.
Yeah, and the pros and cons are, not hard and fast that I've included here, but just thinking through, like right now there's 3 of you, it's fewer people, so the fewer schedules that you have to organize around. You guys are all trustees, so you're intimately aware of the challenges that the ISD is facing, and you understand mission and the direction that you guys would like to go. So you probably have, more of a unified vision than you may have if other folks come on board. Now, that's not necessarily a pro or a con. I think I put it in both because if you have more community input, they may shine a light on something that you guys aren't otherwise aware of. So that's something to think about. There's no city or county approval needed. That's one of the things I think we really need to track, because we want to make sure that we don't unnecessarily put additional constraints on you guys moving forward, needing for you to go to either to the city or the county for approval. So I think keeping the trustee number in the majority is very important. And I would highly recommend that, because even though the city may have no problem with what you're doing and the county may have, and that's obviously the goal, is that we're doing things that work in the community at large, and it is just another step in the process. So additional time, additional effort, on your administration. The developers don't see it as, they see it as being, again, additional step. You have additional issues with NIMBYism to come forward and, cause problems with the city council or whatever. So I think that's really important. As we go up in the number of appointees, I think something else we talk about, I think Director Hunter was saying, 3, 5, or 7, making sure we don't have an inherent tie situation going on. So I think keeping it at an odd number. So kind of that knocks out where you have 3 officials and 1 appointee, or 3 officials and 3 appointees. But if you add 1 person, regardless, I think that person may feel like they have a harder time speaking up, versus if you were to add 2. Then it's like, okay, well, it's not just me, and then, I don't know, I'm going to defer to the trustees because this is an ISD related entity. And so having folks that kind of feel like, okay, well, they feel like there's 2 of them at least, and they may be more candid in sharing their feelings and their opinions. Adding 2 appointees would be seen as, you're providing additional community buy-in. You could be criticized for not having enough. I was trying to think of like all of the things that could come up and all of the things that I've heard from our various entities. But you do have 2 folks that you would not require any city or county approval. And then having a majority of trustees on the board ensures that tax exemption is being approved by folks who are accountable to the voters. And that's when we amended this to the PFC statute 2 years ago and put in this requirement that if you don't have elected officials, or a majority of your board as elected officials, that was one of the main things that was discussed when we were drafting that particular section of the code. It was like, if we're going to be exempting taxes, there should be folks who are accountable to the voters that are making that decision. And then as you get further down, adding 3 appointees or 4 appointees, obviously the pros that you're having additional perspective and community buy-in, but you're going to get into the territory of having the city of Austin or the county approve it. And I, again, just caution that will add an additional layer of bureaucracy that may not be beneficial for your entity.
So on the next page, wanted to just highlight for you some other public facility corporations so you can see what their breakdown is. And you'll see for the the Austin Housing Public Facility Corporation, theirs is the mayor and all the city council members. What's not noted on here, but what they do for example, if they had a COI project, the elected officials approve a committee to basically then see that whole transaction from start to finish. Kind of entrust them that they will have the best interests in mind of the group, but that's their way to kind of bring in community voice, is like through a committee that is just focused on that one specific transaction, but also then doesn't require to keep coming back to the larger board for approvals along the way. Kind of in the Austin Public Facility Corporation, 7-0, Ames ISD, Lake Travis ISD. I would say from what I've found on other school districts, they tend to just be the board. The school board is the PFC board. Now, I think some of that is because of the relative infancy of public facility corporations, especially as it relates to the housing. We have seen, as Summer alluded to earlier, some have issued bonds and used that as a financing tool. And so I think there's a natural inclination, right, that the school board would be the same, because if you're basically issuing bonds to benefit the school to do projects, then it makes sense to have the same people. But what we haven't seen is real housing focused. And so thus, at least I wonder if that's why we're not seeing appointees, because they really haven't moved in that direction yet. The last that I wanted to highlight was San Antonio Housing Trust, which Summer brought to my attention, which is, so they have a 5-2, but in addition to the 2, they have 4 others who are on this advisory board that are community members. So 2 of the 6 community advisory board members vote, but there's more voice through that without necessarily changing the dynamics of the voting, right? And so it's still weighs heavier towards elected officials, but is a way to get more voice. The other comment I'll just make is we are showing you scenarios with 3 elected officials, right, yourselves. And because at least to date, that was where the interest was expressed, and from the larger board of just having 3. But, this does, again, provide a moment to pause and say, well, would you want to bring on a 4th? So you talk about 7, would that be 4 to 3, 4 and 3? And obviously you have to go to the larger school board to see, amongst the other members who would want to be that 4th. But if that's a way to get more community voice, because now instead of 3-2, it's 4-3, like that might be something worth pursuing. And again, we're taking the time now that if you want to pursue this and move beyond just the 3 of you, then like there's no capping that we also have to cap the number of elected officials to what we know it to current. So we'll pause there. Thoughts?
I know I've read them, I know I've seen them, I think I've signed them. The current bylaws said, no, we didn't set out how appointees, because we didn't even have that yet. So they would have to go into the bylaws, right?
Yes, so that's
Yeah.
part of one of the revisions, if you all give us that guidance that you'd like to see appointees, that we would put in the bylaws kind of placeholders, and then we'll talk through what could be a process to find those appointees. But at a minimum, we'd have to update the bylaws to reflect that it's the correct number of individuals. So right now, it just says a minimum of 3.
Of 3. Okay, and so if we expand it out and we're thinking we're gonna add 2 or whatever, those 2 appointees have to be approved not by this board, but the entire board?
Correct.
Okay.
And so what a process could look like is that the 3 of you are basically making recommendation, or it could come from, could be a multi-step, right? As applications come in, it could be staff and one of you reviewing them together, review the applications, then coming to the PFC saying, okay, here's who we recommend to the PFC, and then you all then making that recommendation to the board. There's multiple iterations of how we get it, but yes, at the end of the day, the larger school board needs to approve the appointees.
Okay.
But we do not need to wait for those names in order to
Right.
kind of update the certificate of formation, we can just have a placeholder, say it's vacant. I don't know, Summer, can you do the same with a trustee name and put a vacancy there, or does that have to be specific if you were ever to add another trustee?
I think so long as we have the statutory minimum, which is 3, that we wouldn't have an issue
We
doing
could
that.
put like
So-
a vacant, if you wanted to add a 4th trustee, if you wanted to go more people on the board than less.
And I'll just note, all of the changes, any changes, certificate of formation, bylaws, composition of board, all of this will have to be approved by the full board of trustees.
Yeah.
So anything we're talking about today would have to go, you'll see it again, and then everyone else will see it for the first time.
I personally, I think, just given the interest expressed by other trustees in possibly serving on this BFC, think that 3 is a good number to continue with. I don't think it would, I'm not interested in pursuing the model that you described that the city council uses where everybody is it, and then it's, I feel like we're already the subcommittee that's doing that. So I was wondering, and I don't know if you know what the process is for the TCAD recommendation, like how that happens, that we, you know, if that's a similar structure that we could use, or how intense we're looking to make this before somebody is one of the appointed spots. But I like 2 also. That was where I was personally falling before we had this conversation. So I don't know what the timetable looks like. I know you have a slide that says next steps, but when we would need to make this decision by, but personally, that's where I stand.
I don't think we made it.
I think we're contemplating that if, so I'll move forward with doing appointees, try to do that application and kind of get to a recommendation over the summer. So that way by kind of September, we could then have the larger school board vote. I think Dr. Reach might be able to speak to the TCAD appointee process.
So not trustees, tell me again. Commissioners, board?
Directors.
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 All right, good afternoon, directors. So the Travis Central Appraisal District uses a 2-step process to select their members. Prior to just 1.5 years ago, everyone was appointed, and it was done based off of the overall taxing authority of every member within TCAD. So AISD is actually the largest taxing member. What that means is that we bring in the most taxing dollars. And so they had that 8-member board, and then they divided up those seats based off of everyone's taxing authority. So that left Austin ISD with 2.5. It's actually a little higher than 2.5, but they split it down the middle. And then the city of Austin is the second highest, also has 2.5. And then Travis County had 1, and then they divided up the other ones based off of large and small areas so that everyone had some representation. The new method is that those still exist, plus there is 3 that are elected publicly. And then for the other positions, instead of them just being straight appointed, those positions are now voted on by all the members. So we nominate members, and then again, using our taxing authority, we are the largest. That's how many votes we get. So you have the 3 people who are elected, and then you have the 7 who you vote on overall based off of your taxing authority.
Yeah, let's not use that one.
Can you speak though to the
I don't
nominee?
know how we would even do that.
Yeah, so the current nomination process for TCAD is that any of the taxing authorities, no matter their number of votes, can make as many nominations as they would like to. And all of those people go on a slate to be voted on. So
So when people are
whether,
interested, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but they're interested in being nominated by AISD, what's the process for that?
sure. So if someone wanted to be nominated by Austin ISD, our board would have to vote to approve those nominees. And again, we could name as many nominees as we want. Obviously, we only have so many votes to give, and there's only so many positions available. But we had taxing authorities and TCAD that had 0 on their list. We had 5. The city of Austin had 2. So they could have brought forth any number of nominees that we wanted. Once that list of nominees was completed, that's when the next step came in, and that's when we divided up our number of votes for everyone we wanted to vote for.
Okay.
And then the highest vote getters overall were those who were elected to TCAD.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm sorry, that was a little bit off.
No, it is.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that, if you don't mind, we put a call out for people who were interested.
Yeah.
And people filled out the interest form like they do to serve on the DAC or CBOC or any of our other committees. And then we reviewed and put 5 forward. And
Is
that's
now-
at some point that came to a vote before the board after that had been culled.
We did a special call just for that, but they used the same application that any individual uses who's interested in serving on a district committee.
I remember you explaining the process before, like as you were walking through it. I was like, oh, this is familiar, like, but this is very complicated.
It was much easier earlier. Now there's multiple steps.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the time to have that conversation, but would we be making recommendations as the 3 that are on this PFC board as to who those 2 would be, or would we solicit like applications from the public, or is this even the time to talk about
this-
that level
yeah.
of detail? This is that time?
I
Okay.
think it's a twofold, right? How many people? And then, yeah, what would you want your process to be? And I think, as Director Boswell said, right, the school district already has kind of a process for all our advisory committees of an interest form, et cetera. But you could do something more direct if you didn't want to just do a general open call for people to express interest.
So I think we've decided on the number, though. I hear the add 2, that's 5. And we're saying that the 2 that are appointed,
Yeah,
that are appointed.
that's my
Okay, that-
understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got step 1. And step 2 is deciding the process, because we do have that application or that sort of interest sort of kind of survey. I remember reading, like, oh, I've served on CAC, I've been in PTA, and I work in the community, and I also, feed orphans or whatever. But do we want something more than that? To be more specific, like, are we trying to fill the positions with subject matter experts or people who can better help us guide? Because I know that's helpful on CBOC because there's people who actually know what's being said. So are we?
That is helpful.
That's helpful. So are we looking for specific, general subject matter experts, or what are we looking for, I guess, I know I would like to have people who actually know about the stuff that we're talking about so that I can have, when we're having those conversations, they can, sometimes people who really understand it can kind of explain it to you a little bit better because they're not always in it. So I don't know. Like Matthias explained some things to me sometimes. I'm like, oh, I've heard that a million times, never quite understood it. So what are we looking for? Just rando folks that we love or subject matter experts?
To me, I think there's a lot of value in having some subject matter expertise to kind of amplify our community expertise that's different. If we feel confident, we can also find people who don't have a conflict, who don't work for someone who might be a partner, because I think that's one thing we would want to be really conscious of. And I think we place a high value, I think, as an organization on lots of kinds of expertise, right? And people who struggle to find housing or people who, so I think there are multiple kinds of expertise that might be valuable. And there are a lot of people in the community, I think, who would be available and interested to bring, both kinds of expertise, many kinds of expertise to that. And to me, I think a general call out, you sometimes find people you didn't know were interested who are a great fit. And I think that doesn't keep us from identifying people we know have an interest in this or expertise in this, to encourage them to fill out that application so we can consider them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a wider net is always.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working with another PFC in another area of the state that is looking at removing, because they had a set, we're gonna have this many people that have this requirement, we're gonna have this many people that trying to fill like 3 people who have finance and real estate development background and 3 people who are, community engagement folks and 2 people. And so they're actually going to, like you said, to cast a wider net. I think that, as you said, you may find people that you weren't otherwise tracking who are great board members and have a lot, in San Antonio, the CEO of our food bank is one of the board members who is, I'm always amazed by everything he says. That I'm like, oh, that just makes so much sense. He's not a real estate development person by way of background, but he understands a lot about it. And so he's a very valuable board member that I don't know that I would have otherwise thought of. Obviously, food bank, right, and dealing with folks that are in need, but the development side. So just like what you were saying, I think that.
And we're jumping a little back and forth in the discussion, which is great because that's what the point of this is. But one of the recommended changes that Summer has made for our bylaws is a conflict of interest policy. So, if part of the interest does come from someone in the sector of housing, that at least we have that conflict of interest policy in place to make sure there are no issues down the road and that we're not mistakenly, awarding some project that is going to benefit them in some way.
And you are, as a PFC board members under Chapter 303, you're subject to the same conflict of interest as local officials, right? So there's like an affidavit that you have to fill out. So there's already kind of a control on that. We just need to. You probably have never had a conflict of interest.
I doubt I'm going to have a conflict of interest.
So
I'll have to talk to my money handlers. I don't even know what's the proper name, my finance guys or whatever. Yeah, I'll have to talk to them about it. Yeah.
So it's like the same thing they would do if you're like a zoning commissioner
Yeah.
or, right, it's the same, there's like an affidavit and you have to fill out and sign it and get it notarized or whatever. So
Okay.
it's the same, but I think having a conflict of interest policy, every nonprofit for best practices should have a conflict of interest policy, and you guys are a nonprofit at the end of the day. And then just making sure that we're in alignment with the government code as well
Okay.
in dealing with that, but.
So I have a related question. Would it be possible, I know there isn't on our general application form for people interested in serving on advisory bodies, we don't have a conflict of interest statement as part of that. Would it be possible to ask people to apply to have an additional question about, do you have any potential conflicts of interest, and can you please list them? Because to me, that I can see people applying for lots of different reasons, right? And people with an interest in the sector might also have an interest in this, and I would love to be aware of that as we're considering people. That would be very helpful to me.
Yeah, if you potentially have someone who's going to be recusing themselves from a large number of items.
That happens on planning commission.
I was on zoning commission for the city of
Yeah.
San Antonio. I had to recuse myself all the time, not because of my projects, but because of the law firm. I work at such a big law firm. There was always like, oh, well, hey, so-and-so's working on this thing. So yeah, it was every meeting, there was the summer recusal docket. So,
And yes, we can add a conflict of interest question to the form. So I'm hearing three elected officials, 2 appointees, and that we'd like to use the district kind of process of put out the call for interest and use the form, but with the added conflict of interest. And I'll make sure to look at the interest form too to see if there's anything else that might be helpful to add to, speaks a little bit, narrows it in a little bit towards a public facility corporation compared to just being too vague in general. Great, so I think then if we could jump back to the certificate formation, these recommended changes. So we've talked now about updating the number of directors, which also would happen in the bylaws as well. So then back to Summer on the next point.
yes, and I'll come back to the board composition on the bylaws to talk about term lengths and staggered boards and removal procedures. So there, in the certificate of formation, there's a requirement that the trustees unanimously approve any amendments to the bylaws. So the current changes we're talking about right now, everyone will have to agree on it. If you have one person who doesn't agree with it, then you cannot amend your bylaws. That, in my experience, is highly irregular. Typically, you would have And if there's a reason why you want that, that's fine. I think that we just want to think through that and understand the implications of it, that you're potentially limiting the flexibility of your entity going forward. If you have a board member who doesn't like one of your other board members or just decides that they like to be the dissenting voice. So I would typically see that be just the majority
rule.
kind of the normal for any other action that you're taking. So that is another change that we thought might be helpful to allow the entity to change if it needs going forward. And if there are any other questions or comments? Okay. There's,
Just quickly.
yes.
That was my reason for 3, 5, and 7, right? So that if you, you need that, you don't want to have be 3 and 3. Good God, so sorry. That was my reasoning behind 3, 5, and 7, is that should you have a tie, there's always a tiebreaker, right?
Well, and in this one, it's really interesting because it's only the requirement to amend the bylaws. Right. So it was just an odd inclusion, I thought. The next one is that there's a requirement. So if you were to dissolve the PFC for whatever reason, whether it gets dissolved statutorily or you decide to dissolve it, we're not doing anything with this. It says that you can't dissolve unless you have contracted with another PFC to own your assets. So typically speaking, we would expect that the assets would come back to the ISD. So I didn't find that to be a necessary impediment to you dissolving your entity, so long as there's a bunch of other requirements when you dissolve an entity in the state of Texas. As long as we're complying with all of those, if the assets were to come back to the ISD itself, then I don't know why we would need this other impediment. So that was something that I would recommend just removing and just like, let's follow kind of the state statute that allows the assets to come back to the ISD itself, and just make sure that you've, if there's any liabilities, that you've got adequate capital for any liabilities or taking care of all the things. Then again, that's with every entity in the state of Texas.
And I would just say that these bylaws were kind of just like, these are the bylaws, and we just kind of went with them. Because, to get everything. So I'm personally not married to anything here. I'm looking for guidance on best practices. So, yeah, don't feel like you have to do the hard sell. If you feel like it shouldn't be there, then just tell us, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, and I just want to obviously, because I wasn't here when all of this started, so I don't know if there were things that were discussed that it's like, oh no, we have like this one random thing, right? I can't always think of all the reasons why something may have been put into place, but I understand what you're saying.
I would say the main thing that was discussed is that we will approve these and then change them.
Yeah,
That's really what our discussion was.
Okay.
Is that these are very preliminary and there's a whole lot more we want in there, but we need time to have a thoughtful discussion about it. So and we need a council first, and then we went and found you. So, put an RFQ out for council, and here we are. So, yeah, we're exactly where I think we intended to be with this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. And the next
Yes.
step is bringing revised bylaws, but we just want to at least vocalize up front as you requested, like, what are you going to change? Just that way, when you're reading it, you might not necessarily notice it because it's in all the legalese. And so we're just trying to call this out. So, but I appreciate the comment of the trust that like, we're not making changes for the sake of making changes.
Right. So the next change is the indemnification section. So this is indemnification of you guys as board members. And we want to make sure that it aligns with the statutory language. It doesn't quite harmonize with that. So my recommendation there is to just go back to what the statute allows and to keep that, basically to say to the fullest extent permitted by the law, here's the indemnification that you guys are entitled to, and then follow what the statute says. I think that then that way we don't get into potential conflicting language. What does this word mean versus that word? Was there some intent behind it? Let's just stick with what the statute allows and not try to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you. And would it be possible to give us just a brief memo about what the statute does and doesn't allow? and what our exposure is in terms of what we can be indemnified for and what we can't be?
Absolutely.
That would be very helpful.
I can prepare that.
Thank you. And I would also appreciate just kind of what the coverage we have, the insurance coverage we have through the district does and doesn't cover us for on this. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Generally speaking, and I will give you a memo, but just for you to have an idea, generally speaking, if you're acting in good faith within kind of the bounds of your service as a board member, you're generally covered in terms of what you can be indemnified for. You know, obviously like going and punching someone at a board meeting or burning down someone's house, or I mean, I don't know, like there's a lot of things you could do that like you're not gonna be indemnified for if you say like, I'm doing this on behalf of the PFC, right? You're not acting in good faith and within the scope of your service.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't think it needs to be a long memo, but that would be helpful to just have in front of us. Thank you.
And then the quorum.
Yes, so then finally, just the quorum requirements. I think something that is worth having a brief conversation on is the fact that the statute doesn't require the quorum to be a majority of the board. It could be something less than. However, if we're only talking about adding 2 people, the minimum is 3. So if we have 5, then I think our minimum is going to have to be 3, whether we go with a majority or we go with statutory minimum. But if there's
The minimum right now is 3?
the minimum for a quorum would be, yes, is 3.
But how many physically?
Mike.
How many people physically have to be here?
I think it's just a majority. You don't have to have
Okay, so-
everyone here in, right, because you're allowed to have you're allowed to have remote meetings.
Yeah, okay. I was just double checking on that. So it would be 3 no matter what.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're moving on now to the bylaws recommended changes. And so we talked a little bit, obviously, about the non-elected members and then the qualifications of those. The board term was something I wanted to kind of bring up with you guys to think this through, because you guys, I think right now the term is 4 years, and that corresponds with does that correspond with you're elected for 4 years on the trust to be a trustee? So, but you guys are staggered. So 2 of you still have 2 years left, and 1 of you has 4 years left, right? So our bylaws don't align with that. So you're serving a 4-year term, the same as but there's no like alignment of that. So I think we want to either set it up to where it's staggered, which means you would have kind of 2 people that would serve and then they would roll off at some point. And when you have 5 folks, you could do 3 and 2 or something like that, right? Or we can just, if you were to not be elected or decide that you didn't want to run for election, then you're the one looking at me. You can just look up at the ceiling. If any of you were to decide to not run again or were to not be reelected, the person who took over that after you would be appointed for the remainder of your term. So if you were 2 years into your term, they would only serve a 2-year term. It's just more of an administrative, like trying to make sure that everyone is being appointed and that the terms are set, that it's not just like, okay, from the date of your service, you might have started serving on March 1st, you might have started serving on January 30th. It needs to be kind of set with a certain time frame so that we don't just have all these different terms that nobody knows what it is.
We know about that. When it comes to the appointees, are they serving the same? Because they're being appointed at X date, so they go to X end date.
We would have like a set, I think what the idea would be is like, pick the day, June 1st, whenever your fiscal year, however you want to do it. Pick a day, that's the day that the term starts, regardless of when you're appointed.
Oh, gotcha.
So kind of like the zoning commission, planning commission, like those types of entities, right? They have like everybody goes until a certain day, regardless of when you got appointed, right? And then, so then you're up, that position has its dates. And so the question, I think, is whether or not we want to do it on a staggered basis, so every 2 years it changes, or do you want to keep them all the same and one of you may be off, right? There may be one person that is only serving 2 years because you're up for election. So it's really a kind of a logistical question. In terms of ease of administration, having all of them be the same is easier. You don't have to keep up with who's on class 1 and who's on class 2, right? In terms of who's up or not. It'll just depend on whether that person's elected. And then the same thing with your appointees, it would all be the same time frame. The other thing to think about is that you would get some potential turnover, right? And having people being on a staggered board and whether or not you want that. I have some boards that want potential turnover. They want to be able to refresh if they feel like they need that.
I happen to like staggered because I think it's nice to have that continuity of knowledge and to have, now that we're up and running, to not have all 3 of us roll off at the same time and have 3 new people come who don't have that continuity, to me has value. And I think with our appointees, we could, draw by lottery and have one of them be the 2-year and one of them the 4-year and kind of begin that staggering. And then I think the other question is, do we want a term limit? Like, can you be appointed how many times? Forever? Twice? What does that look like?
Yeah.
I was thinking about just the nature of the projects that we'd be overseeing. They just take a very long time, and so I could see a benefit to longevity of service, but at the same time, we're only talking about 2 positions, and so that gives someone a lot of influence over a long period of time if there isn't something like a term limit. Do you know what I think like the most analogous thing is like our CBOC, right? So what's the structure there? Is that something worth mirroring, or
It's been updated and updated and updated, so I don't know like the
where it
final-
currently
where it is
stands?
finally.
Yeah.
I don't know where it is finally. I'm sure Dr. Reach knows specifically.
Anyway.
And I don't think we have appointees who serve, I think we may have some appointees who serve for 2-year terms. I think that's kind of our norm. I don't think we have appointees that serve longer than 2 years terms. It's a question of how many times they can renew and whether this should be different or the same as that.
Yeah.
And I think that matches our election cycle. And, we all get different roles when that starts. And so that's another question is, it's the norm on our board to reconstitute our committees every 2 years, all of them. And do we treat this like a committee where it's a 2-year term and the larger board decides who's on it, or the officers, I think, decide who's on it, is how it works. And would we rather do it that way? Because we just, as officers, decided these are the people who will stay. And our bylaws or the certificate of formation lists us. So, it was kind of not a hard decision, but also not so I think there's
I think there would be a challenge, as Director Gonzalez has highlighted, if you're not staggered amongst just the 3 of you, because then, given the length of some of these projects, if all 3 of you are gone, it would take a step back. As much as the larger school board might be aware what's happening, we're assuming they're not in the weeds on it like you all are, right? They're entrusting you to follow the detail and then bring back, any concerns, et cetera. And so we certainly could, as we bring a revised draft of bylaws, bring forward a recommendation in the bylaws of a staggered approach. And then when they're brought to you, could always use just an amendment, right? You could say, yes, we want to approve these, but amend if you, for some reason, took issue. I think what would be, I guess the guidance that I would look for is, should we be mimicking kind of what the school board does, right? 2-year term, 2-year kind of cycles, and on also like the limits that you even as trustees at the school board, how long you can be a school board trustee, and maybe taking that into consideration, that we wouldn't want someone be on the PFC board, even though it's hard to fathom, right, 10 plus years out, but like wouldn't want someone who could be on, an appointee who could be on the PFC board longer than you could be on the school board, you know?
I think you can be a school board trustee till you die, right?
For as many
Oh.
times as they'll
I know
want
people
to.
who have been on, like I've been on school board since 1987.
As long as you can physically take it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, give somebody else a shot, right? But yeah, no.
Well, then-
So maybe let's not do that one.
Stand corrected, then the question then is, would you want to put a limit on yourselves and appointees, say, look, hey, after so many years, we need new folks, even if it's just a different trustee coming on?
I don't know about the limit piece. I do like the piece where it's kind of like the committees, where you're like, hey, Trustee Gonzalez, do you want to be the president of the board? I mean, that's how I got the job.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think kind of looking at that, but that way everybody gets a chance. Like they say, everybody should be president of the school board. I don't personally believe that. But they always say everybody should take turns being president. But this does give some more people. And I'll sit here as long as they want me to sit here. And I don't know that, like when's COI's end date? If everything, like tracks like it's supposed to be, to when is the turnkey moment?
Your grand opening?
Yeah.
In 2028 at the,
So see,
Yeah.
that's like, I might not get reelected, right? So that could happen. So we should have that. That would just be where we have that. Should the person, you serve until X, should you not be on the school board, you would be replaced through appointment by the larger, stop with that. You know what I'm saying though, right?
yes, but staggered, but not necessarily limited.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. What are you saying?
I think I agree, just because of I think about the interest or the expertise and also the time, that if someone were to replace me in District 6, would they have an interest in serving on this subcommittee, or would they have the additional time to be able to devote to the work of the PFC, or the history, the background, like how much would they be able to contribute on a short, depending on what was happening on that. So I think it would be better to defer to whoever the officers are at that time that would have, I think, a much closer sense of whatever the work that this committee is doing is than whomever won the election. I mean, they very well could be the same person, but I'm just saying, yeah.
So if I'm understanding, so that in terms of the term length, are we going to stay with 4 years or are we going to 2 years?
Well, we're already at 4 and 2.
No, I mean,
4.
right.
In the
well-
bylaws.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is like, so you have 2 years left, but then from there, it's going to go to 4 year. Those will be 4-year terms,
The
right?
next, I guess it depends on who sits here. Because if it were like Kevin, right? Because he would have 2 years left. It wouldn't always be.
Or does it make sense just to have your whole board be up every 2 years? That potentially
Isn't
could get
that
it.
what, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I
No, go ahead.
apologize. Wouldn't that be when the officers would redecide committee appointments anyway?
Yeah,
Is when
every
there's a
2 years.
new iteration of the board, so every 2 years, that's when it happens, so,
And then the whole board would need to approve that.
yeah.
So to me, I think that's a healthier way to do it. And I think our system would probably end up choosing people who have
The connection.
background and
Yeah,
expertise.
et cetera.
And I think even with the length of the projects, if we're using this well, we're gonna have multiple projects at multiple phases at one time. And so someone's always gonna be leaving
That's true.
in the middle of something they started.
Yeah.
And someone's always gonna be coming in
To
the
a
middle.
project that's about to be completed,
To
yeah.
get to the end. So that worries me less, as long as we have that overlapping continuity.
And so then more so staggered with the appointees.
With-
If every 2 years you're either, right, and it's a little off, right, because when do we, I guess, what was that, January? So 2 years from relatively now, right, when you all did the committees, assuming you're all with us, right, that could be the start of another 2 years for the three of you. But what we could do is stagger the appointees, so that way it's not all 5 people could potentially be new at the same time.
Right. And I think that would be unlikely, but not impossible.
But,
Yeah.
okay. We'll
Well, I'm trying to think through. So does that mean, okay, so that means you guys are on 2-year terms, each one of you?
Yes. I think if
Regardless-
As this board is concerned, that's what
Yes.
it's.
Right,
Would the board members be on 2-year terms in even number years in January? And the appointees could be on odd number years and we could stagger that way?
Yes.
Would that be complicated or,
No.
okay.
It's just the first term might be a little longer.
The first term might be a little weird, but.
Okay, so staggered terms, so everybody has 2-year terms. But we're doing, you guys are even years. And the appointees are odd years.
But the next year coming
To
up.
be sure
would
not
an
all 5
even
people
year.
go away at the same time. To be sure there's always someone there with continuity. Or is that complicating it too much?
Oh, no, wouldn't we need to be on January of the odd year?
Yeah, we need
Oh,
to be
January
on
of the odd year.
year.
But if that complicates things, tell us.
Wouldn't be a term limit, just be a new term. So we're not saying you can only be on for 2 years, it's just saying every 2 years,
2 years at a time.
2 years at a time. You're reelected every 2 years.
We're re-impaneled.
We would be
Reappointed.
reappointed, and we would need to
Reappointed every
be
2
on the
years.
odd year.
Yeah,
The odd.
Yeah.
Because the next year coming up would be the even year. So these new
Right.
appointees that we would have come in, they would come in on an even year.
correct.
And maybe that's unnecessarily complicating it, and we just trust the wisdom of the board to not sweep everyone away. I mean, maybe we just trust that we're gonna have smart people doing it, or if they choose to sweep everyone away, it's for a really good reason. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I looked up CBOC while you all were talking, and it looks like I guess the members are tied, it says that they're tied to the board members. And it's every 2 years, and each member can serve 2 consecutive year terms of 2 years.
But these,
So I mean,
yeah.
that's similar, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I understand that you're looking to, I guess, protect the continuity by having staggered years, but I mean, if you follow your model in the CBOC, if there's indicative of anything in terms of trust, I mean, you have it such that it is tied to those.
No, here's the difference though, because they're appointed by everybody. So they're tied to all of us. So they would be appointed and the whole board would vote on them. And so like if I leave and like when I became, they're like, hey, here are your appointees. Do you want to keep these people or do you want to do something different? In the case, if I left, it would not mean anything for those people because they were appointed by the whole board. So the even odd is not necessarily complicated. I think it works better for this situation so that you still don't have everybody rolling off at the same time.
We can draft it up and then.
okay,
Yeah, it's not,
When we bring it back to you, if it strikes as odd, then
okay.
we can adjust.
this will not be the most complicated board structure that I have drafted, so I'm feeling okay about this at this
And
point.
I have the safety and security meeting at 5:30.
Yes,
Just
we're-
want to let you guys know that. And I'm co-chair, so FYI. Okay,
we have
thank
just
you.
a few more talking
And
points.
then, do we want to do limits? So you can serve, your terms are 2 years and it's staggered. Can you serve a total of 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, or indefinitely?
I don't have an appetite to limit it right now. It's not, like, there's some other committees I'm like, yeah, we need to have some term limits. But I think in this one, we don't need to at this time. Is anybody feeling like we want to hedge our bets or?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
And now we don't need an even number. We don't need unanimous if they want to change it in the future.
Correct.
If they want to add term limits. So we're making that little concession for,
Yes, exactly. Other things that I wanted to bring up was committees. Do you guys want to think about having, I don't think at this point you're a large enough board that I would necessarily tell you need to have a committee, but if you wanted to, when you have 5 folks, appoint 2 people to a governance and policy committee and 2 people to a finance committee. I think what my recommendation would be is that we allow the president to put forth committees if the president decides. Right, at an ad hoc basis,
I'm
right?
good with that.
yeah.
Okay, we talked about the conflict. Oh, we haven't talked about officer requirements. So currently, the way that your bylaws are drafted, there's The certificate and the bylaws don't totally line up. The certificate doesn't specify that officers must also be board members, but the bylaws do require it for certain positions. That's one of the things that I want to talk about. Do you want the officers of the corporation to only come from your board? Or is there a situation where it makes sense to have someone else from maybe the staff be, for example, an assistant secretary? And this is going to go to something that Jeremy alluded to earlier, which is authorization to sign documents. And so what I typically recommend is that you have someone who's not a board member, who is employed by the entity or by the sponsor of the entity in this case, who's available to sign documents if needed. So when we fully authorize COI, for example, what I would typically do is I'll have a resolution that says any officer of the corporation is authorized to sign the documents for this transaction, to consummate this transaction. What that does is that allows you guys to not have to be beholden to crazy developer, like, oh, there's this document at the end, or there's this settlement statement, or this thing. Things get moving really quickly at the ends of these deals. And it might be like 10 p.m. and it's like, hey, we really need this signature on this document that we just were presented with at 9:30. We're fine with it. Legal side signs off on it, but we've got to get someone to sign it. And so what that does is that allows you to kind of delegate that signatory authority to someone who's, that's their job, and maybe not you guys as your, have other things going on. So that's what I've always recommended, and that works very well. I have clients who've chosen not to do that, and I will tell you that their board members tend to be pretty cranky about those last minute requests. But if there's some reason that you guys feel that you don't want to do that, then we can certainly not put that into the bylaws. But that is something that I would typically recommend, is just to have a position that is allowed to be held by someone who's not a board member, to allow us that flexibility. It doesn't mean you have to do it. We're not appointing that person now. We're just saying, okay, this position can be filled either by a board member or by someone who's not a board member. It's allowing you the flexibility to do that.
Okay, I just want some clarification. So like if there's a document that's like, hey, who signs documents normally? Like the president, secretary?
Yes, you do both.
Both, okay. So it's like, hey, the president's available, but the secretary's not. You would say, hey, what are you?
Andrew.
No, I mean, like, what's your position? Vice president?
Sure.
Vice president can sign the documents. Like, oh, none of those people are available.
That's it.
We need this signed. It's going to be X. So what you're saying, we need that. I don't right now with the configuration, and here's the thing, right? You can call me at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm probably gonna be up. It's in a DocuSign, like, hey, sign it. I probably would do it. I don't know about the people that come behind me sitting in this chair. I also, like, if Jeremy was our sign off person, I probably wouldn't have a lot of problems with that, right? But I don't know what the future holds. So I don't want to make a problem for somebody or not make a problem. So I don't really know. I don't know what to I don't know what I'm thinking. I think right now, I think we're good, right? But in the future, or maybe we should just wait till after this deal and be like, that's not good. I don't know.
Yeah, we can live and learn with it, right? And if it was an issue, then we can address it by amending the bylaws after that time.
And at the same time, I'm still not sound on anything, and I'm trying to go fast for time. What would be the?
I was wrong about the date, and I have all the time, because
Oh,
it's
lovely.
tomorrow, not today.
Lovely. You're worse than me. I did the same thing. I forgot about this meeting. It was not today on my calendar.
Got too much going on.
So if, 'cause all these people, we probably have the most flexible schedules of anybody on the board, I think, this group. But still, what if I'm somewhere and I can't get to a computer, whatever? We could just write it in and see, if we wanted to, just so we wouldn't have to go back, just say, should this person not be available, this person, there's president, vice president, secretary of state, right? That sort of thing, just kind of go down the list. I don't know, do people do that?
Yeah, what we could do is when we approve the deal finally, if you have someone who's already, let's say Jeremy's the assistant secretary, I'm going to use that as an example. So you're like, okay, well, we don't really see the reason to have Jeremy on this deal because we know we're all going to be available for the next 3 weeks or whatever, right? Then we could just say the president, vice president, and secretary are authorized to sign. We don't have to include assistant secretary as being authorized to sign. It's getting a little complicated. Like, again, I normally just authorize all the officers to sign to give that flexibility because you never know.
That's what I'm saying.
You could end up in the hospital, right? Like, there's like things that you're not planning for, and frequently it's not DocuSign, frequently it's wet signatures.
Oh,
So, like recorded documents a lot of the time, banks want wet signatures. So it's like I'm sending a courier to you to sign the document, and then the courier is bringing the document to the title company or the lender or us or whoever.
I would just add, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you would have approved all the documents. So it's not that this officer, whoever it be, and it could be Superintendent Segura, as that officer, but you've already approved everything. It's just, again, it's
just getting that signature.
who's signing and everything.
There's frequently things that kind of come up where there's a signature page that was lost or that was, not included in the original packet of signature page, right? There's like all kinds of things that come up at the end because, again, people just things get a little chaotic. And so I recommend having more people available to sign than less.
I understand more people available to sign than less. I think there's logic to that. It worries me just given that we're a public entity, having someone who's not an elected official have that, like one of the three of the elected trustees on the committee, I see having that authority. I worry about someone who we appoint having that authority, even though we have voted, we've approved, we've done all that. And is that a reasonable concern or not?
I mean, I think it would at least, I guess it depends on where you view the superintendent relative to that. I know that's not an elected position, but as a board-approved position compared to other staff members like myself. And so I would say could be at least to give a little bit more flexibility and not to put more stuff on Superintendent Segura's desk potentially, but at least have him be the officer because the superintendent has been specifically approved by the board.
I think that's different from having one of the appointees. Yeah.
And so, while we're still there, kind of in the bylaws, how do we, so is it that an appointee could be appointed? Because we appoint the vice president, we don't vote on them, we appoint president, vice president, secretary. The appointees, how would they fall in that?
We're talking about someone who's not on the board, being a officer of the board, though. So
But that's what I'm saying.
Superintendent Segura is not on your PFC board, but
okay.
you could say they are an officer of the board that is authorized to sign on your behalf.
I see what you're saying.
Not
Okay.
specifically an officer, okay, got
We've
it.
been officer of the corporation.
Yeah.
Officer of the corporation. Okay, that makes more sense to
Yeah.
me.
So typically, like you would have, like for example, like on a housing authority, you would have like your board of commissioners. They would elect a chairman or a president, vice president, or whatever. But then you would have also like a CEO or executive director of the housing authority itself. So it's a person who's not on the board, who's kind of
Doing the daily work.
the CEO, right, doing all of the daily work of that, but he's not a board member also. So that's what we're kind of talking about, is having someone who's an officer of the corporation who acts on behalf of the corporation at the direction of the board, who's not actually a board member who votes. They're someone who's told what to do.
Okay, I'm good.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Okay, so we're good. Well, I guess, so that begs the question then, do you want your appointees, who are going to be board members, to have the ability to be officers of your board?
In the best possible place, right? The president's not leading anything. They're sort of facilitating the whole kind of thing. But I don't know that, I think that's easily sort of established in our board. I think some people like get the big head when they get in the seat, right? And so I would just be really nervous about an appointee unless there was like some really good onboarding, right? Like some really strenuous onboarding of like what this means. You don't get to wear a crown, there's no scepter, you're just facilitating the discussion and sort of signing papers every now and again or whatever. So right now, I'm not comfortable with that. I feel like it's a public facilities corporation, we're elected officials, we should really be here. That's just me.
Would you be comfortable with them having the ability to hold certain officer positions? Maybe not president, but maybe secretary, treasurer, vice president?
Do we have a treasurer? No, yes.
Secretary.
But secretary, for sure, yeah.
Not
And
vice
even
president.
like chair, co-chair for those committees that we have, that we may be thinking about when we have more people, yeah.
So we're good with not president. What about vice president?
Again, I don't really know, because I feel like we're elected, that's the heavy, right? What do other people do?
It varies. So the main board that I have that's made up of the housing trust board, that's the complicated board that I deal with. Not complicated in that they're complicated people, but just the board structure is complicated. Theirs is very complicated because they have these appointees who technically aren't board members and don't have a vote, but they can be voted to be officers of the corporation. And when the board votes them to be an officer, then they become a board member with a voice voting on projects. So right now it's 5 and 2, but that could change. Because I have two. One of them is a vice president and one of them is a secretary. But they're the community non-elected folks. So the president is elected, the vice president is not, the secretary is not, the treasurer is elected, and then we have an assistant secretary who is also not a board member. So of their officers, only 2 of them are elected. But that's the way that they chose to do it. I mean, the thing, I guess, that the control there is that, so who's appointing, if we have the officers be elected by the board, by 5 people, if you have to elect your officers that way, 3 of you who are trustees are going to hold the majority vote. So you're going to vote who the president, vice president, and secretary, that's ultimately at the end of the day, the 3 of you have the control over that. So whether or not you want to allow someone who's an appointee, who is a non-elected person, and maybe that person would be a great leader, would be a great facilitator of conversations, but you guys would ultimately, because you have that voting block, be able to control that.
But right now, in our bylaws that are gonna mimic our committees, these positions are appointed. They're not voted on. They're appointed by the officers of the board at large.
Right. So then again, you have the control
There's control there, so there's no need to worry about that. Okay, hold on, that's fine.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, we're okay with leaving the control up to,
The officers of the board at large, which is the president, vice president, and secretary of the larger board.
okay.
I'll repeat what I said for the mic, because I never turn it on. Right now, these positions are appointed by the larger board, and it's the president, the vice president, and the secretary who make up the officers of the larger board. So they're gonna be still deciding who sits here.
So I'm going to point out that the bylaws actually don't say that.
Oh, do they not? Oh, they probably don't. It's probably just what we did, because we were moving fast.
Yeah.
So we need to make them say that then. Because we just said we were gonna do 2-year terms. And do it like the committees and appoint.
But they're going to appoint the directors, but they don't appoint the officers. So they appoint you as directors to get on the board, and then whoever
we
ends up
did
being
elect officers
president, vice
at our first
president,
meeting.
secretary.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
So you guys would, according to how your bylaws are currently drafted, you guys will control that, this board, whether it's made up of the 3 of you or whoever, and then the 2 appointees or whoever. You guys will elect your officers.
At
And
the
we're
end of the
okay with
day,
this?
You
Yeah,
have the majority.
Yeah, we're
I
good.
think that's fine.
Okay,
You have the protection in place.
okay. We talked about conflict of interest and we talked about indemnification. So I think as a general rule, I think we've talked about everything that I have on my list.
So then just to kind of wrap things up, our kind of recommended actions as to and not that there's anything for you to vote on today, but just actions as to like, here's what happens for the next steps. So Summer will update the certificate of formation, the bylaws, based on today's conversation. We will then bring revised documents to you to approve, and then they're going to the larger school board has to approve them. Once that is complete, we'll file revised documents with the state. It could take up to 60 days for the state to say, yep, you're good, we got everything. In parallel, though, we can, thinking perhaps once we get through the end of the school year, so you take advantage of the summer to use that as the time period for people to submit interest, but we'd have this open application process. And then come the fall in September, when school starts up again, you would make recommendations to the school board. So presuming there's more than 2 people who express interest, right, you would say, okay, of all the applicants, we want to nominate these 2 people, but the school board itself have to approve them as directors of the Public Facility Corporation. And so that's really over the next, it's March, so the next 6 months, that's what we want to get to. And that will put us in a good place for towards the end of the calendar year to be ready for the larger new 5-person board or corporation to then enter into the ground leases with the NRP group for the Coy site, and then we can also start having conversations about what if anything do we want to do beyond Coy. And in terms of the most immediate timing, and we'll come back to it certain dates, but I think we'll likely try to schedule a PFC meeting right up against a board meeting, because it will be just a simple, quick action. We'll definitely get the documents to you far in advance. So at least if there is anything, you can submit questions, et cetera, but the presumption will be that the revised documents will be in a good place, that outside of maybe a simple amendment to like, hey, yes, we approve these with this one change, essentially the PFC corporation can approve them, and then we can quickly go to a board meeting on it too.
And I would, is there anything to keep us from putting applications out before we have that final approval from the AG, just pending, assuming it gets approved? Or the Secretary of State, whoever it is?
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. Is there anything that keeps us from putting the application out kind of pending, or would we want to wait for that final approval before we put the application out?
I mean, you may just put a note.
Yeah, saying
application.
pending approval,
Yeah,
Yeah.
pending final approval, like here's the
Yeah.
application.
but that's more just kind of kindness to people and full information rather than a legal bar that would keep us from doing that, right?
I can't think of any, other than people saying like, you wasted my time because I
Right.
filled out this
But it
application.
wouldn't jeopardize
but-
approval or anything like that.
No.
Okay, so I would love to go ahead and just, kind of overlap that time, compress that time. And then I think there's also something helpful about getting those applications out before summer, because it's so hard to communicate with our school community during the summer. And some of these people might come from, kind of community in that larger sense, but I think I want to be sure that we're communicating well
Absolutely.
with our school community.
We can do that.
The only other action item was the memo. We still need the memo, Lynn?
Oh,
An indemnification? Yeah,
Yes.
that's the only thing that we would expect to be.
Yeah,
Brief.
brief and cheap. Yeah,
It's gonna probably just talk about what the statute says.
Perfect.
Gonna be,
Okay.
it's a short statute, so shouldn't be a problem. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much. This concludes our meeting. Secretary Boswell, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
so moved.
The meeting is adjourned at 5:35.